In this episode, the first one, I shine a spotlight on the Nickelodeon series Renford Rejects and speak to two members of the cast, Bill Homewood and Tom Weller, about their experiences on the show. That's all to come on the 90s and Noughties Podcast, a podcast focusing on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. My name's Jamie Dyer. How's it going? Before we get into the show, let me tell you of the ways you can contact the podcast. Email 90sandnaughties@outlook.com, tweet 90s_Noughties UK on Twitter, or check out the Facebook page, 90s and Noughties UK. It feels right to be starting this brand new podcast with an episode celebrating the Renford Rejects. It was one of my favourite shows growing up, and upon reflection has definitely shaped my life. The adventures of Jason, Ben, Stuart and co. really struck a chord with me, and I was once told by a university lecturer that shows aren't really about their setting, but rather the themes that lay underneath. So I've been thinking about this, and this is what I've come up with. The Renford Rejects may have had football at its heart, but I think it was about much more than that. I felt the show really focused on identity. After all, it's a group of teenagers who are turned away because they don't conform to perceived norms. For example, Bruno de Grady, aka Barry Grade, played by Paul Parris, culturally identified himself as Italian despite being born in England. Ben Phillips, played by Charlie Rolland, was a goalkeeper who loved poetry. And Robin Walker, played by Holly Davidson, was a gifted footballer who was turned away by Basil Stoker for being a girl in what he called a man's game. Hey, now we're on the subject, even Elvis fan Eddie McAvoy, played by Alex Norton, is a guy totally out of his time, as he ran the Rejects hangout, Graceland, with his wife Priscilla. I really identified with all of these characters, and I know that many others did as well. Anyway, I realise that for those that are completely unaware with this show, the last few minutes probably haven't made any sense. So let's go back to the beginning and I'll give you a very brief overview. Renford Rejects was a teen comedy that ran for 4 series, spanning 52 episodes between 1998 and 2001 on Nickelodeon. It followed the lives of a group of teenagers who'd failed to get into their school football team, so they started their own five-a-side. What followed was a marvellous mix of clever dialogue, a great soundtrack, likeable characters, and a whole host of guest stars. Speaking of guest stars, this brings us quite nicely to our guests for this week. Later, we'll hear from Tom Weller, who played wannabe hardman Terry Stoker across all 4 series of the show. But first, we hear from the man who played his father, the terrifying Basil Stoker. I recently had the chance to chat to actor Bill Homewood via WhatsApp. Now, I'll be honest with you, that's a sentence I never thought I would say. My first question was fairly straightforward. How did he get the job on the Renford Rejects?
I think my agent will have called me at home and said, you got an interview on Thursday or something. I remember going along for an interview, I think actually at the Spotlight offices in Leicester Square, or just off Leicester Square. I think that's where I went for this one, and popped into a room and chatted to a director and a writer, Stephen Baywall and Chris Wilson. And I think there might have been a third person in there. By the time I left the room, I remember thinking I'd got the part, which you don't, very often you're wrong when you think you've got a part. But I think we were more or less by the end of the conversation talking about how we were going to portray Stoker. So I kind of knew. That's as much as I can remember. I remember immediately they showed me a bit of script, immediately coming up with Stoker as I did him, which was an amalgamation of several gym teachers that I'd had at school. I was born in 1946, which is 73 years ago, and therefore at school all my gym teachers, well, all my teachers pretty much, my male teachers anyway, had been in the military, in the army. And of course, gym teachers who'd been in the army were a special breed, a bit sergeant major-ish and a bit fierce. And I based Stoker on a sort of cross-section of gym teachers I'd had over the gym and games teachers I'd had over the years. Even the walk I did, Stoker running along the touchline, I had a football teacher at junior school who used to run along the touchline like that, picking up his knees, encouraging us to pick up our knees when we ran. And the whole tradition of never passing backwards, always passing forwards, always doubling your boots before the match, and basing everything you do on the style of play that Sir Stanley Matthews was famous for in his day, all that stuff. Because the writer Chris Wilson trusted me with this, what I would get from the office was a script in which my part was, my replies and things were just like a line or two, and then I developed them in the style of Stoker, or, you know, a list of negatives. He never said, that's true. He would always say, that ain't never not true, and such like. So I had a little bet on with the writer each week that I could add another negative to one of my sentences, and the maximum I got up to was 14 negatives cancelling each other out in one sentence. I think that was the longest ever, and I think that was an episode on a beach in Sardinia. Anyway, my memories of the show are all like that. It was a hilarious time. The part was hilarious, and the locations were fun, and we all got on very well. It was a good laugh.
Yes, well, it always looks like you're having such great fun. Your character was actually quite intense, because sometimes you're looking people straight in the eye and things like that. Do you think your training kind of helped you with that?
My training? Well, I tell you, if you've done a lot of theatre work and then you do screen work, and I had done a lot of screen work by then, so I knew this already, but you do learn not to make big wide arm gestures, because you're going to force your cameraman to step back and to pull out, and you're not going to get the close-ups. So you learn to be intense and small physically, but to put that intensity into your face. And I saw Stoker as a furious man. He was furious with the girliness of football, the very idea of girls playing football, the very idea of passing backwards, the very idea of fancy, flashy trainer-type football boots, and so on and so on. All this enraged him, and so he was more or less constantly in a rage. And he and Terry, his thuggish son, were actually a complicated, vengeful and angry couple of people. They did one episode where I think somebody came round to the house, Stoker's house, and if I remember right, I've only just remembered this, Jamie, I think they put an apron on me, and when I came to the door, I was evidently cooking. I think it was a stroke of genius by the writer. That was a side of Stoker that was never developed beyond that one scene, but it was very good fun.
I think that's what was great about that show, is certainly early on, for the main characters, there were kind of two worlds, weren't there? There was sort of being inside that cafe and also being on the football field, and they did a very good job of splitting those two worlds up and making them collide occasionally.
Yeah, and actually, while we're being kind of intellectual about it, they introduced a third world too, which was the fantasy world, in which occasionally we travelled back through time. For instance, when Stoker became Basil Stoker or something, Emperor of Rome, and that was the episode in which Stoker was thrown by a giant catapult, which his son had accidentally pulled the lever to operate when Stoker was sitting in it. And in fact, I was very badly injured shooting that scene because they mistakenly operated the catapult when I was sitting in it. It's a long story, but that's exactly what happened. And I was thrown through the air. I was on stage in London in Phantom of the Opera at the same time, and I was filming in Isha, and I was severely injured. I had fractured skull, damage to my spine, and so on. It was an awful accident. I was thrown quite a long way and quite high up, and landed head first on a tree that had been laid on its side. And I should really remember the episode for that, but in fact, it was one of the funniest things I've ever filmed. And even that episode, in which I required hospital help afterwards and a long period of rehabilitation, actually, even that episode I remember, and it makes me laugh to think of it. The idea was the writer went off into a complete flight of fantasy, and suddenly the history of how football developed and all of that led them to Rome. Another time we were cowboys, and Stoker was Il Santoro, and it was a sort of homage stroke send-up of the Magnificent Seven. I think that probably is the best episode of all. But again, the license to be very, very silly was never very far away, and I think probably as the episodes went on, we all got madder and madder. Really, it was a very funny show, wasn't it?
I can agree, and certainly at the beginning, even though it wasn't quite as overt as that, there were still little fantasy elements in there, weren't there?
Oh, yes. I mean, well, establishing my character, I think in the very first or second episode, I've forgotten the name, Bruno Di Gradi, who had pretensions as an Italian footballer, said, but signor, football is an art, or something like that. Yeah. And Stoker went mad. I still remember the line, an art? An art? Football, my son, is not an art. It is a man's game. And honestly, I would deliver that line and lines like that entirely seriously, straight into the face of the other protagonist. But believe me, as soon as they shouted cut, we were all on the floor rolling about.
It's extremely funny, and it must be quite difficult for the other actors when you're being so deadpan to keep a straight face.
But the director once said to me, when we were actually filming the episode in Sardinia, which was the Wild Wild Renford, I think the episode was called. When we were filming that episode, the director said to me one day, you really don't care what you look like, do you? It's true, Jamie, there's no room for vanity when you're doing comedy. Stoker was ridiculous, and I liked playing him. And I liked playing him one-dimensional too. I didn't want to make out that deep down inside he was a softie or a nice man, or that he collected stamps or something. I was very happy to play him as a one-dimensionally nasty man, rather similar to several of my sports and gym teachers that I'd encountered in my childhood.
It comes across extremely well.
Well, thank you. My wife's an actress, Estelle Kohler, and Estelle was a leading lady at the RSC for well over 40 years, and we were comparing notes quite recently, actually, for a little joint interview we did for something. We both realized that each of us had made entire careers out of playing villains. Even in Shakespeare, I played the baddies. I once played Orsino in Twelfth Night, who's essentially a goodie, although he's a bit of a sop. And it was my worst ever performance. Yes, Patrick Stewart was directing that. And Patrick one day said, "You play the guitar, don't you, Bill?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Why don't you play the guitar in the part then? It would help you, give you something to do with your hands." I was so bad at playing a nice man, an ordinary person. I did play a few later on. I got better at it as time went by. But I always went straight to the heart of villains and never had any problems at all, either in rehearsal or on stage or on screen.
Referring back to the Rejects, your on-screen relationship with Tom Weller, who played your son, you had such a great rapport, didn't you?
Yes, oh yeah, Tom and I got on very well. He's quite a methody actor, or was then, and I'm not at all a methody sort of actor. He tends to come in from underneath and I tend to come in from above. And my experience throughout my career has been that those two sorts of actors work brilliantly together. I find it easier in a way to work with method actors than I do to work with other actors who aren't so methody like me. And Tom and I really got on very well. He was quietly thuggish and I was noisily thuggish. And I think also he did a very clever thing, which was, I think from time to time, a sort of shame. A sort of shame crossed Terry's face. I used to see it from time to time. Was one of the ingredients that used to make me laugh when I watched the episodes. Yeah, I did. I got on very well with Tom. We're in touch now, thanks to Twitter, actually, because of the Twitter interest, the ongoing Twitter interest in the Renford Rejects. It could do with being revived, couldn't it? People love it when they see it to this day. Actually, I've been lucky. I won't dwell on this because I know we're talking about the Rejects, but in the 80s, I was on the Adventure Game as a regular, but also before that I was on Multicoloured Swap Shop and Saturday Superstore as an occasional studio guest, and all of those are still regarded as television cream, children's television cream, I mean classic TV, and although I did lots of other things, guesting on Rainbow and many other shows. I did a thing called So You Want to Be Top for BBC Children as well with Gary Wilmot. I did lots, but the ones that are remembered, of them, the most recent is Renford Rejects, which I think has almost achieved cult status now, hasn't it? It really was very, very good telly, wasn't it?
Oh, extremely, yes. And I was a avid watcher when I was younger, and you sort of fall out of it, and then you discover it again. It's kind of that thing people keep rediscovering. Certainly on Twitter, the amount of love on there for the show is amazing, isn't it?
I know. With anything, almost anything to do with Rejects, I do it, as you know, in my Stoker character, simply because the joke goes on. It still makes me laugh. And I've quite enjoyed people who know me as a poet or as a classical actor. I've quite enjoyed that moment when they discover me on Twitter and realise I was Stoker. Obviously, they immediately follow, and then I kind of lead them on a bit with a bit of Stoker going on about Stanley Matthews or whatever. I think it's extraordinary that 22 years later, I still am as amused by it as I was when I did it.
The combination of writing, directing, casting, all made into a magical formula, really. I was a little bit intimidated beforehand, thinking, I'm going to interview this guy, this is Basil Stoker. To me, I was slightly younger than the characters in that show. To me, you were terrifying.
Did you think I was going to say, pull your socks up, lad?
Exactly. One thing I wanted to kind of draw upon was the guest stars. Do you have any memories of the guest stars that you worked with on the Rejects?
I do. And now you've got me struggling to remember names. There was that fantastic, very high camp art critic. What was Bran Sewell from the Evening Standard? A completely brilliant, very waspish, completely brilliant journalist and immensely knowledgeable about the arts and so on, and whom one knew as a sort of po-faced television arts pundit, and also he had been, through a relationship, indirectly involved in the Blunt spy scandal. And so he was a fascinating man. He's dead now. But anyway, who would have thought that he would come on to Renford Rejects and be as entertaining as an actor, if you like, as he was? Complete surprise. And I know that the guys, I didn't have scenes with him, but I was there during his filming. I know the guys had a very big laugh with him. I think he needed controlling almost, because he was prepared to do just about anything. And then there was the World Cup team. Of course, the 66 team were there. I did film with them. I've got no particular memories, except it was a day or two, because I wasn't playing, I was just yelling from the touchline. But it was a day or two of quite nice, enjoyable filming. Martin Keogh was the one I spent most time talking to of all those guys, a great fullback, of course. And I think he kind of got the joke too. I think he kind of got Stoker. As a matter of fact, I think it worked out that the boys worked much more with the celebrities than Stoker. Stoker, generally speaking, if Stoker was in an episode, 9 times out of 10, the episode was about Stoker. And because I wasn't in all the episodes, out of every 12, I would have been in 8 or 9, I think, something like that, maybe 9. So there were whole episodes without me, and several of those featured celebrities. When there were my episodes, there were fewer of those sort of invited stars. Just a few times it happened. There was that guy, Rhino, who was one of the world's strongest men people, I think. And I remember him rocking up in some sort of massive 4-wheel drive thing with a number plate, which I think it was RH1NO or something. And actually, he was good fun. There was a bloke who did animatronics who was very famous for playing a gorilla in some of those big gorilla films in Hollywood. And we did an episode with him in which I was in a cage with him, but I was convulsed with laughter nearly all the time with him, I remember. I can't remember his name. He was quite brilliant. Yeah, so that was good fun. Yeah, that's another, you're right, actually, Jamie, that's another thing that marked the show out. It was extraordinarily flexible, if you think about it, that the show could move from being a vehicle for celebrities being very silly to mock history, to modern football ethics, to training and so on. A very, very interesting show. And then there was the central girl. They had, I was on the show, I was always on the show, but they had 3 different lead girls in the team. The wonderful Lucy Punch, of course, went on to great things. Holly Davidson is a very well-known trainer now. I can't remember the name of the other girl. She was very good too. It was a good gang of actors.
Yes, it was. And just to pick up on something that you said earlier about Stoker, the fact that when you were in an episode, it was most likely about you or something to do with you. Before the interview, I thought I'll brush up on a couple of episodes just kind of to see very you-centric episodes, and thought, there was an episode where you worked quite extensively with Martin Delaney. Basically, you're worried about him, you decide to get him onto the Razors team, and he has to play against the Rejects. He then kind of fakes being bad, and you end up losing the game. And there's a very interesting scene where you're trying to talk him into joining you. He won't join you, and you're practically in his face. I don't know whether you remember this at all, but the intensity of that moment and the way that they used the music to kind of make it even more intense was extremely memorable.
Well, you're describing something I can imagine very well, but I don't remember that moment. But I can tell you this, that Martin, like me, always on his lines, always on his place, always ready, the consummate professional. So all of my work with Martin was a pleasure. I quite often had passing encounters with his character, of course. There was an episode when we had a confrontation. I can tell you, I don't know what the camera was on at that moment, but I can tell you when it went on to him, he would have been as in my face as I was in his. He was jolly good to work with. Of course, he's a busy actor these days, and that was a very good start for him, that show, I know. Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't remember that specific moment. Damn, it's 22 years ago. I think it's amazing what talking to you has brought back, as a matter of fact, and it just shows what fun the show was, that it's so indelibly in my mind still.
I don't blame you for not remembering everything, because there was like 4 seasons, or 4 series, as we used to say, before the world got Americanized, and there were 13 episodes or so in each series. That's a lot of episodes.
It is, and as I did 8 or 9 in each series, that's a lot of episodes too. So they tend to go into a jumble. But also there's the fact that since that, I've been on dozens and dozens of television shows on location and in studio and so on. They do tend to jumble up in your mind a little bit. And that was 22 years ago. But I think I probably remember more about Rejects than I do about most work that I've ever done.
To bring us quite nicely to a conclusion, what have you been doing quite recently?
Well, I live in the south of France. I rather cut my own throat with regard to the London theatre, but I'd been when we moved to France early in the 20s, the 2000s. Yes. When we moved full time here, I kind of severed my relationship with the London stage scene. I'd been on and off in the West End for years by then, and I didn't mind that because I was doing more and more television. So since we've moved here, I've gone back to England to do a few things, but I do a lot of writing. And I write as a poet. I've published 4 collections, I think it is, since I moved to France. And I published them first on Facebook. I've got a page, Bill Homewood's Poem a Week by Me for You, or one word. And on that page, I publish each new poem. And when I get to enough to put into a collection, then they get published in collections, which is about once a year, once every couple of years, that sort of thing. So I'm very busy with that. I've just finished recording a great British classic, Le Morte d'Arthur, by Mallory for Naxos audiobooks. And in fact, in the last few years, Jamie, I've been recording, in fact, over the last 20 years, I've been recording for Naxos audiobooks, great British and French classics. But in the last few years, since I've been solely in France, I seem to have specialized in great French classics in translation, because they obviously need an actor who can slip in and out of the lingo because of all the French names, proper names, and so on in the great books by Hugo and Dumas, things like Les Miserables and the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Count of Monte Cristo and so on, which I've recorded. I have done British classics as well in recent times. But anyway, I've just finished this mammoth book, The Death of King Arthur, Le Morte d'Arthur, which is the sort of original, well, certainly the original assembly of the legends of King Arthur, which led to all the Knights of the Round Table stuff, movies, television series, other books, and so on, in the centuries since. And I had to record it in the original translation, which is in Middle English. So there was quite a lot of research involved in that one, and I literally finished that a couple of weeks ago, and it's now with the sound editor and Naxos who are producing it, and I think it's going to come on the market in November. I should make it clear, Jamie, I've got a recording studio here in France and having spent many years in recording studios for BBC and various commercial enterprises in Britain before I moved here, I'm used to studio discipline and so on. And so Naxos entrust me with doing the recordings here. I have a recording studio set to the same standards as if I were in a studio in London, and I record the books here. And then, thanks to the incredible modern technology, I can get my recordings to them via Dropbox or various other means, we transfer or whatever, and they do the edit in London, and hey presto, and the records are on the shelves. That and my poetry are the two ways that I fill my time here.
Before we end this, you don't have to answer this, but obviously, what do you think your character in The Rejects, what do you think Basil Stoker would be doing now?
It makes me laugh. What a good question. If he were 20 years older now, I think he would be sitting in his house in wherever he lives. I think when we filmed, he was in sort of northwest London somewhere. In his terraced house, and there would be a few cups on the wall. I think he would still be dubboning his boots. I bet you he'd be mixed up with the local scouts or something, and I think he'd probably be down the park with a boys' football team of a Sunday morning, and so on. I expect he'd be very opinionated. I'm pretty sure that he would be pro Brexit. And I don't know what he would make of COVID-19. He'd probably think we were all sissies for not going out and facing it.
quite possibly, yes.
And I think he would be entirely bald. He was pretty bald then. Don't you think Stoker by now would have concocted his memoirs?
Quite possibly, yeah.
He might call it A Man's Game.
Yeah. Actor Bill Homewood discussing his life in and out of the Renford Rejects. It was great to talk to him about his role as Stoker, and I'm still astonished how he's able to slip into character so easily. And just as an aside here, I talked to Bill for some time, much longer than the interview included here, so please do look out for other non-reject parts of the interview on future editions. You're listening to the 90s and Noughties UK podcast with me, Jamie Dyer. And now let's draw our attention to Terry Stoker, the son of Basil, the injured steward, in the first episode of the show, then spent the rest of the series playing the hard man to just about everyone. Well, everyone except Robin, Sue, and Mia, of course. It was a thrill to catch up with actor Tom Weller, who, I think you'll agree, sounds no different to back in the day. As with Bill, I started the interview by asking him how he got the job.
Oh, we're going back a few years now. My first, I remember receiving an audition from my agent at the time, and I received a script. I don't remember the first audition, if I'm being brutally honest. It was probably in a darkened room somewhere in London. But I certainly remember the callback, and because on the callback we had to play football. If I remember rightly, I just played. I'm a pretty decent footballer, but I played terribly, and I thought I'd blown any chance of getting the part because I played so awfully. But as luck would have it, about 2 weeks after that audition, I received the news that I got the part, which was fabulous.
You play Terry Stoker in the series, in which you work alongside Bill Homewood quite a lot as his son. How was that working with Bill?
Yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, Bill's great. He's a true thespian. He's been around the block a few times, and I can honestly say I learned a lot from him. Actually, it was really good. It's always nice to, as an actor, it's always nice to sort of rub off on, or sort of let other people rub off on you, especially people that have been doing it for as long as Bill has. So it was great, and Bill was great, and we all had a great time.
It always looks like you're having a good time on screen because I think all the actors kind of gelled very well, didn't they? It was a very funny show.
Yeah, I think that's because we gelled very well off camera as well. We probably had a few sort of bumps in the road along the way, but all in all, we all got on incredibly well. We pretty much all lived together. We all had a house in, I think it was Kensal Green or somewhere like that. And we pretty much all stayed together. We all went out together. We all socialised together. So, you know, that when you've got that sort of togetherness outside, it just comes off very well in front of the camera. And we were all young and hungry and laughing all the time and, you know, happy to sort of try new things and try and make it as funny as possible. And I think that's why, you know, I've still got some great friends from the show. Roger, who played Vinny, we sort of became best friends during it, and are still great friends now, although he lives in LA, so I don't see him as much as I'd like. But he really is a top guy, and I made a friend for life with him. So, yeah, I think that's probably the reason why it came across so good on the camera, you know.
I didn't know he lived in LA. That seems like the perfect place for him, doesn't it? If you know his character.
Absolutely, because let me tell you, that man has got some serious talent. Not only is he a fabulous actor, he's also a tremendous dancer, a singer. And what we used to do is when we all used to go out to clubs and stuff in London, and we would use Roger as sort of the bait. So we would send him into the middle, let him start dancing, let the sort of crowd gather round, and then, you know, sort of use him to attract the female attention, as it were. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I don't know. It was a long time ago and we were young.
Well, yeah, it's great stuff. And that's the thing. You were all, it was a very young cast, wasn't it?
Yeah, very young. I think I was 16, I think, when I got the part. I know, not James, Martin Delaney. He was 16 because we actually went to the same secondary school together for a little while. Roger was 15, I think, but then I think Matthew Leitch, the guy who went on to play, he was in Band of Brothers, I think he was about 24, and so was Paul Parris, who played Bruno de Grady. He was 24, I think. So they were the oldest, but again, still young, and, you know, we all got on like a house on fire. We really did. It was great. Made friends for life doing that show.
Aside from the cast as well, it had some great guest stars, didn't it?
Oh, man, some absolute crackers, really. Some great actors like Alexi Sale. They sort of escaped me now, but also some tremendous footballers from past and at that time present. You know, Martin Keown, Gianfranco Zola. But then we played with some of the winners of the 1966 World Cup team, and that really was, you know, I don't get starstruck very easily, but I was on that day. Football has been such a massive part of my life, and the 1966 World Cup, I mean, I was born in 1980, but it's always been talked about, and it was something that I've watched so many times. And to have Gordon Banks, Jeff Cohen, Martin Peters, and of course the great Jeff Hurst was a real treat and an honour to play with, and they were so great as well. You never would have known that, you know. In fact, I would say every sort of football star that we had on the show were lovely. There was no sort of prima donnas amongst them. They were all really, really nice. And Harry Redknapp, he made a guest appearance on the show, and he just as you see him on the TV, just a down to earth, lovely fella. Really, really nice. Great.
You say football is a massive part of your life. Which club do you support?
I support Leyton Orient for my sins. But you sort of, I think you just support the first team you go and see, don't you, usually? And my dad took me to see a Leyton Orient match, and then I ended up getting a season ticket there. And you know, although I don't go as much these days, I love the club, and we had we had one of the best seasons we'd ever had recently when we got promoted from the National League, and then tragically we lost our manager just in Edinburgh, which was one of the saddest days I've ever had, if I'm brutally honest with you. He was such an amazing person at the club, and he will never be forgotten. It was amazing. But yeah, Leyton Orient fan since the beginning, really. So there you are.
When you were doing the Renford Rejects, it was a massive time for football, wasn't it? It was really on the up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously football in this country is the biggest played and watched sport, but at the time, yeah, it was massive. It was absolutely huge, and I think they couldn't have picked a better time to bring out a football show, really. I mean, when we were filming it, I just didn't realise how big a show it was going to be. I really didn't. I just thought it was going to be a sort of have a little slot on Nickelodeon, and it ended up being on the Big Breakfast on Channel 4 as well. But I really didn't realise how big a show it actually was going to be, and it really was. And it's still on TV today, which is incredible. If you're up at sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and you're watching Nickelodeon, then feel free to give it a watch. But it's just incredible that it's lasted that long, you know?
Well, not just on TV, but it seems that in the minds of everybody that saw it, it's still very much present, isn't it? There's a massive social media gathering for it.
Yeah, which is crazy, really. You know, after all that time. But I guess maybe it was because I think what was that other program? Was it Jesse's Giants or something? I think that was a few years before. But after that, there wasn't really any sort of football-based programs until the Dream Team came out, which actually Roger was in. Vinny, he had a part in the Dream Team, and I'm not sure, I might be wrong in this, but I think Martin Delaney might have made an appearance in there. I'm not sure. But until then, it was the only sort of football-based program, and it went across all the ages, really. It was on Nickelodeon, so it was essentially a kids program, but it was, you know, if I used to go out at, you know, to pubs and clubs and stuff, I would get recognised all the time by people of my own age. So I guess it's, you know, people just enjoyed it for the football side of it.
Well, yes, and there was plenty of comedy along the way. I've always wanted to ask this, really. When you were filming those football scenes, there was always like a match at the end of the episode. Was it choreographed, or was it just literally off the hoof?
So some of it was choreographed and some of it wasn't. It really is as simple as that. So Renford Rejects wasn't like most sort of TV shows that the way it was filmed was completely new and different and exciting, because if you notice, there aren't a lot of cutaways in the Renford Rejects. It's all filmed in one continuous shot. So we had to rehearse the shots quite extensively. And what you would have is you would have the cameraman, the director, and all of the people, all of the crew behind, and they would just follow round behind the camera, and you were moving all in and out. And you know, some of these scenes were sort of 6 to 8 pages of dialogue, so they were quite long scenes, and they were all filmed in one continuous camera shot. But obviously, the football's hard to do that. So what we would do, let's say that in the script it was, you know, Terry had to run up and score, blast it past Ben Phillips in goal. So that would be, so he'd be like, right, you do that, and you know, you're playing football, so you can't always get it 100% right. So it might take a few takes or whatever. But and then after that, it would just be like, right, we just need to match footage. So we used to just sort of play a match, really, till the director said cut. And sometimes he'd say, right, I need this team to do sort of, you know, let them be on top, or it would be, I need this team to be on top, and I need him to score a goal. So it was kind of scripted, but a lot of the time it was just, you know, just play so we can get some match shots. But obviously, some of it had to be, to go with the storyline, some of it had to be set up. So that's how it was.
It always looked spontaneous, and obviously that show as well was quite ahead of its time, because I believe your character, I've seen every episode, by the way, I'm a massive fan. Your character often, and certainly Basil as well, Bill, your father, used to talk about how girls couldn't play football. And yet there it was, you know, in the show, bright as day, girls could play football. That was always very ahead of time for me. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. I mean, I think the women's side of football was just on the up at that time. We had, I think it was the Chelsea ladies team come down one time. They were just phenomenal footballers. I mean, it was a little bit like, you know, we had to play against them, and you sort of think, oh, I'm going to have to take it easy because it's a girl. I tell you what, these girls were strong. And it really sort of opened my eyes to the women's game. But yeah, I mean, that sort of classic, it's the bully thing, isn't it? It's me, Dad and I in the show were bullies. And it was always, yeah, you know, girls can't play football. And of course, they had Robin Walker, and then Lucy Punch's character. What was her name? Sue. And then Megan, who was the third girl, and obviously they could all play football and they were really good, and that was the whole thing. It was always sort of egg on our faces, which was, I suppose it was a little ahead of its time, you know. It was great.
Well, definitely. I think it still stands up, and of course Lucy in particular has gone on to great success.
Yeah, wonderful. She's a truly wonderful actress. actor, I should say, sorry. And it's I love to see people we've worked with in the past do really well for themselves. You've got James Corden, of course, who was one of my sidekicks in one of the episodes. He's gone on to tremendous success. But Lucy Punch is a real talent. Martin Delaney, who has made a really decent career out for himself. And he was a really hard worker, so he deserves everything he's got, really. Matthew Leitch has done really well. Roger Davies has done really well. Some really good stories that have come out of it. It's fantastic.
Well, definitely, and it all springs from this tiny little Nickelodeon show that I believe was one of the first for Nickelodeon UK.
Yeah, I think it was the first. I think it was the first English show on Nickelodeon. And it was, I remember going into Nickelodeon to do a live web chat. We got, I think it was 10 times the amount of hits than when Keenan and Kel. I don't know if you remember that show. Keenan and Kel came into Nickelodeon in London, and we got sort of 10 times the amount of hits that they got, which was really surprising to me. I don't think at the time I ever grasped just how big the show was. It was only sort of years after when we, still getting recognised, sort of 10 years after, and there goes Terry Stoker, and you just think, bloody hell, this really must have made a tremendous impact, It was phenomenal, really was fantastic.
You became something of a regular a bit later on, didn't you?
Yeah, so in the first series I had 4 episodes, and then I had a meeting with Stephen Baylor, who's the executive producer and director, and he said he really liked what I was doing and he wanted to put me in more episodes. And I think in the second series I had like 7. And then in the third series it went up to sort of 8 or 9. And in the fourth series I think I was in pretty much every episode and had some of my own episodes as well. Because the feedback for Terry Stoker and Basil was really good. There was even talk at one point of doing a spin-off show, which obviously never materialised. But I think the characters just got bigger and bigger because they were just comical and funny. And my performance... when on the first series, I was so nervous because I'd done a few tiny little TV appearances, but never anything like that, and I was really nervous. And I think I went into it with all with the wrong attitude. I'd come straight out of the Brit School, and I've been studying like method acting, and so I came into it like thinking I was like Robert De Niro, and it's just not what it was after, what they were after. And I remember saying, Stephen said to me once, he went, right, if you just look over there and then turn around to the camera. And I was like, yeah, but what am I looking at, Stephen? Why am I looking at that? He went, who do you think you are, De Niro? And that kind of sort of brought me back down to earth with a crash. And I realised what we were trying to make. And after that, I just let loose a little bit. And in the second series, I ramped up the sort of the comedy factor, and it just got more and more. And if you look at my performance in the fourth series to the first, he's like chalk and cheese, completely different character. Which just over time I just became way more comfortable with the character, and I could just sort of slip in and out of him in an instant. So that's I think that's why I got more and more episodes as the series went on.
And I think that's something that you share with your co-star Bill, because when I spoke to him, he seems to be able to snap in and out of that character so quickly.
Yeah, he always could. He's a little bit of a genius, is our Bill. He had so many talents, like. He had this really bizarre talent that he could speak backwards. So I can't remember if it was, he could like spell words backwards really, really quickly. And I think he had a part in a show one time, and he was called like the Backwards Man or something. He had all these really weird talents, and we filmed some episodes in Sardinia in the full series, and he couldn't speak Italian when we went there. We went there for 2 weeks. By the time we left, he was almost fluent in Italian. So, yeah, he's just an incredible guy who seems to have these sort of genius about him. He really is. He's brilliant.
Yes, you hit on something there, because later on in the series you started to have a lot more kind of fantasy episodes, didn't you?
Yeah, there was. I think. Well, I can't remember if I had any episodes in the third series. Yes, I did. I think. Do you know what? I can't remember. But I know that I had some episodes where. I think there was one where I was trying to befriend all of the rejects to get them back for some reason, and I had to keep getting into all these different characters and stuff like that. But there was so many episodes. My son absolutely loves them. I've got them all taped on Sky Plus, and when I'm watching them, it just brings back all the memories. And I forget sometimes about the episodes that we did. There were so many over a 4-year period, so it's hard to remember them all. But no, they were all great. They really were. It's brilliant.
Yes, I mean there were 13 episodes a series, which is quite a lot for a British series, because normally there's about 6 episodes to a series.
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 writers. There was forgive me, it was a guy called Patrick and a man called Chris. They were the 2 main writers, I think, and they come up with some really great stuff. And of course, it was. I think what was great about it as well is we were allowed a little bit of artistic freedom. So sometimes we would just go off the script. If you didn't think your character would quite say it like that, then we were allowed to just change it and alter things slightly. But in general, the scripts were gold dust. You know, they were really, really good.
There was a lot of very funny banter between you and Bill, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think especially in the later episodes, I played on him being a bit, you know, the sort of thickness of the character. He was not very clever, whereas Bill was clever, and we just started to banter between each other and bounce off of each other using that. I think in one episode he talks about Vivaldi, the famous composer, and I thought he was a footballer or something like that, you know, just general sort of him saying these things, and then, you know, so it was just easy to bounce off each other, because our characters were, although they came from the same sort of area as in the sort of bully, the hard man thing, they were sort of intelligence-wise chalk and cheese, like it couldn't be more further apart, you know.
No, that's right. What's your kind of lasting memory from that time?
My lasting memory, it simply was, if not the best, one of the best times of my life. All 4 years of shooting that show were just full of amazing memories. Just, you know, from the actual filming of the show to the, you know, to just living with the guys and just having a laugh every minute, to playing cricket in the green room. Every single part of it was fantastic. I don't remember a bad part. Going to Sardinia to film the 3 episodes we did out there, it was just an adventure, and we sort of took the bull by the horns and just went for it, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. Great memories, great cast, and the crew were great as well. Everything about it was just brilliant from beginning to end. It was just fabulous.
What are you up to these days?
So these days I own a gardening company, believe it or not. Which was always a passion of mine, and I decided to start a gardening company, but I also do some writing as well. I dipped my toe back into the acting world a few years back, and I did a short film horror for a friend of mine. I did a few pilots for a few things, and I have decided just before this lockdown happened, I had decided I went to the Brit School in Croydon. And I'm still friendly with the principal there, Stuart Walden, who is just a wonderful man. And he asked me to go back and be in the Year 13 production of Sweet Charity, which I said, absolutely, I'll do. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it because of the lockdown. But we've been talking, and he wants to direct me in something, and I want to get back into acting, because that is really where my passion lies. My company that I've got, the gardening company, is sort of running itself now. So watch out in the near future, because I'm going to get back into it, I think. So we'll watch this space, I guess.
Well, that's extremely exciting. And I asked this question to Bill. What would your character be doing now if it's 20 years on, and you know, what would he be doing?
Believe it or not, right, when I was practicing my writing, I wrote an episode of Renford Rejects, a brand new episode where we're all older, we've all got children and stuff like this. And what happened in the episode was they were going to close down Renford Park, and the sort of Rejects, it was, I think, Matthew Leitch's character, Stuart Jackson, his son was playing for the Renford Rejects, but they were going to close down the Renford Park. So he got all of the Renford Rejects together to try and save the park, but they needed my influence, because it was my dad's granddad or my dad's company that were going to close down and build on the park. And in the script, Terry is a dance teacher, and the scene that where the Renford Rejects go to find him was he's in a leotard with a sort of ballet tutu on, and he's teaching ballet to little children. And that's where I saw Terry being in this day and age, that he's gone sort of full circle. You know, he sort of had a breakdown after the Renford Rejects kept beating him, and he's sort of, you know, left his dad and he's found his true passion, which was ballet. I thought that would be really funny, so I guess that's what he'd be doing now.
That is perfect, isn't it? And I'm sure there are many people out there that hopes that one day that will come to fruition.
Well, it's something I was thinking about, and I spoke to another guy, and it's something. I mean, I don't even know the sort of mechanics behind it. I don't know if we would get the rights to do it or whatever. But I think there's something still there. It feels like it might be a bit of unfinished business, and whether we could get all the sort of cast back together or not, I don't know. But it's something I've been thinking about, and who knows? Maybe, when I get a bit of spare time in the next few months, maybe I'll sit down and try and get some of the cast together and maybe write something. Who knows?
Well, fantastic. I wish you the best of luck with that, and obviously your future acting opportunities. And thank you very much for appearing on the podcast today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Actor Tom Weller talking to me, Jamie Dyer, about his role as Terry Stoker on the Renford Rejects. I don't know about anyone else, but I have loved reminiscing about the Renford Rejects today, and I realise that there is so much to cover in one single subject. And this is the thing with this podcast, it's brand new, rules haven't really been set yet, but if you've been listening today and we haven't covered an area that you're interested in, then don't worry. We will return to the subject at a later date if the interest is there. So if any other cast members or anyone that worked on the show, the Renford Rejects, or anything else for that matter, they are more than welcome to come on and talk about that and whatever else they have done since as well. Because this is a celebration of 2 decades of entertainment in Britain, as it were. And the thing about the Renford Rejects is it was the first show for Nickelodeon UK, and I recently have been watching through those episodes, and I've loved it. I've loved revisiting a lot of those. I feel like I've seen them yesterday, but a lot of the episodes that we've talked about, the one with the 1966 football team in it, the one with Gianfranco Zola and Martin Keown, where Bill Homewood looks into Martin Keown's eyes and says, "You've gone soft, lad." It's just wonderful. It's wonderful stuff. And certainly I have always been a fan of the Rejects. And I said earlier that they shaped my life. They have, because Vinny, the guy that walked around with the camera all the time and wanted to be a commentator in the sports world. I didn't want to be in the sports world, but I wanted to be in media. And I think it was probably him being the first example that I ever saw of a guy wanting to get into media on TV. So, yeah, thank you, Vinny and Roger Davies, for bringing that to life. And on that similar subject, Eddie McAvoy, who ran Graceland's Cafe, was a massive Elvis fan and loved 50s rock and roll stuff. Well, aside from 90s and noughties, I also write reviews of 1950s rock and roll and rockabilly records. So maybe that started there. That's just a couple of examples that spring to my mind of how they shaped my life. What about you? Have they shaped your life in any way? Maybe seeing an actor guest on the show ignited your interest. Perhaps some storyline or whatever put you in mind of something that perhaps you wouldn't have seen before. I mean, they did lots of things. They did a ballet episode, didn't they? They did a swimming thing as well, I think, at some point. Maybe seeing that encouraged you to get into that. Do let me know. I'll give you all the details in just a moment. But once again, I'd like to say I have absolutely loved having Bill and Tom on the show to discuss the Renford Rejects and lots of other things as well. And certainly I hope over the next few weeks, through various roundtables, interviews, and just general analysis, you will enjoy the show as much as I've had making it, because I've been working on this for a couple of months now, and we really appear to have hit a format. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But on the Renford Rejects, we will return to this subject, hopefully, at a later date. But for the first time ever, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to the 90s and Noughties UK podcast, a podcast focusing on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. If you like the podcast and would like to hear more, please rate, comment and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. So whether you're iTunes, Google Podcasts, whatever it is, let us know what you think, and tune in for another episode a week from this episode being released, so 7 days. Yes, and if you'd like to get in contact in the meantime, you can email 90s and Noughties at outlook.com, tweet 90s and Noughties UK on Twitter, or go to the Facebook page, which is just simply 90s and Noughties UK. This is Jamie Dyer saying see you on the next episode. Bye bye.